You are alone in a dark room. Nobody else is in the house. And some part of you still checks the doorway. That reflex is old. Older than any religion you can name. Older than writing. Older than farming. Older than the oldest temple on earth. The question is how old, and whether we can prove a single thing about it. Start with the image most people already know. Eyes. In the book of Ezekiel, there is a description of wheels inside wheels, and the rims of those wheels are covered in eyes. In Isaiah, there are 6 winged beings standing above a throne, calling to each other. In that tradition, these are not gods. They are messengers and servants. The word behind angel simply means messenger. Those texts are roughly 2,600 years old. On the human timeline, that is recent, almost modern. But the instinct underneath them, the sense that something unseen has eyes and attention and an interest in what you do, looks far older than any text that survives. How much older is where this gets difficult? Because belief leaves no bones. You cannot excavate a thought. There is no layer in the ground where faith begins. Nobody left a note. So archaeologists work with the next best thing. Behavior that makes no practical sense. That is the whole method, and it is worth understanding before we go any further, because everything ahead depends on it. A stone tool has an obvious purpose. It cuts. A hearth has an obvious purpose. It burns. But a body placed carefully into a dug pit does nothing for the living. A necklace of eagle claws feeds nobody. A carving of a creature that has never existed has no function at all. And when people haul 2 tons of rock 1/3 of a kilometer into a pitch-black cave, build a circle with it, and then never live there, something other than survival is happening. Those 4 things, the treated dead, the useless object, the impossible image, and effort spent where nobody lived, are the closest thing we have to evidence of a mind reaching for something invisible. Here is the honest limit. None of it proves belief. Not one item on that list. Care for the dead can be grief with nothing attached. Ornaments can be status. Impossible images can be stories told for pleasure. Monuments can be politics. We cannot interview a single person in this video. Everything ahead is inference, and some of the most famous examples have already collapsed under scrutiny. I will show you those too. But the pattern is large, it is old, and it repeats on every inhabited continent. That is worth sitting with. Start with the dead, because that is where the record starts. Somewhere deep in the Ice Ages, humans stopped leaving their dead where they fell. The most famous case is Shanidar Cave, in the mountains of northern Iraq. Ralph Seletsky excavated there through the 1950s and 60s and recovered the remains of around 10 Neanderthals. One of them, known as Shanidar 4, became world famous. Soil around the body held dense clumps of pollen from flowering plants, and Seletsky suggested the man had been laid out on a bed of flowers. It is a beautiful image. It is also probably wrong. Later researchers pointed out that a burrowing rodent common at the site stores flower heads in its tunnels. The pollen may simply be a rodent pantry that happened to sit beside a corpse. That is how this field works. A famous story, then decades of doubt. But Shanidar did not go away. A new team returned in recent years and found another skeleton, called Shanidar Z, lying in the same cluster of bodies. The sediments suggested a dip in the cave floor that had been used more than once, with bodies placed in roughly the same spot across a long stretch of time. Not a bed of flowers. Something arguably stranger. A place they kept coming back to. Then there is La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, excavated in 1908, where a Neanderthal was found in what looked like a pit. For most of a century, many researchers assumed that pit was natural. Then a team re-excavated the site and argued the depression had been dug, and that the body was covered quickly enough to protect the bones from weathering and scavengers. And at La Ferrassie, also in France, the remains of a Neanderthal infant were re-examined recently. The bones were barely weathered and barely gnawed, and the body appeared to have been placed in a pit, against the slope of the sediment around it. So the current reading, held loosely, is that Neanderthals sometimes buried their dead. Not always, not everywhere, but sometimes. Whether that means they believed anything is a separate question, and nobody can answer it. Now push much further back, to Qafzeh Cave in Israel, somewhere between 90 and 100,000 years old. There, an adolescent was found with the antlers of a red deer placed on the upper chest, and ochre in the burial area. At nearby skull, another individual was reported with the jaw of a wild boar. Deer antlers keep nobody alive. Placing them on a chest is a choice with no practical return, and the red ochre keeps appearing. Ground pigment turns up at burial after burial across tens of thousands of years and several continents, which at minimum tells you the color meant something to somebody. And the ornaments start earlier than most people expect. At Krapina in Croatia, a set of white-tailed eagle talons roughly 130,000 years old carry cut marks and polish, red as claws strung or mounted to be worn. Eagles are dangerous and hard to catch, and their talons do no work at all. Somebody took that risk purely for decoration, or for whatever decoration was standing in for. At Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, perforated shells stained with pigment were recovered from layers more than 100,000 years old, some of the residue mixed with a glittering mineral. None of that proves a spirit world. It proves that meaning had already come loose from usefulness. And that is the doorway everything else in this video walks through. But if you want the most extravagant thing prehistoric humans ever did for their dead, go to Russia. Sungir, near Vladimir, is about 34,000 years old. What was found there is genuinely hard to take in. 2 children were buried head to head. With them were thousands of beads carved from mammoth-ivory, sewn onto their clothing. A belt strung with a couple of hundred fox canine teeth. Carved discs and small figurines. And spears made from mammoth tusk that had somehow been straightened, one of them well over 2 meters long. Estimates of the labor vary and should be treated carefully, but shaping a single ivory bead by hand takes a long time, and there were thousands of them. The total runs into thousands of hours, possibly far more. Now hold that against the world they lived in. Ice Age. Calories scarce. Every hour spent grinding a bead is an hour not spent hunting, not spent making tools, not spent keeping warm. And they spent it decorating 2 dead children. You can read that as belief in a journey. You can read it as display of status by the living. Both readings are honest, and the evidence does not settle it. What it does settle is the scale. Whatever they thought was happening to those children, it was worth more to them than food. One more case, because it shows how fierce the arguments get. In South Africa, in a cave system called Rising Star, researchers recovered hundreds of bones of a small-brained human relative called Homo naledi, deep inside a chamber reachable only through a series of tight squeezes. The team argued this was deliberate disposal of bodies, and possibly burial, roughly 250,000 years ago, that would push intentional treatment of the dead well outside our own species. The response was blunt. Reviewers and other specialists argued the sediment evidence did not support digging, and that natural processes had not been ruled out. It is not settled, and may not be for years. I am including it because you should see the field arguing, not because it is proven. It is not. Now the second category, images of things that do not exist. This, to me, is the strongest hint in the entire record. In a cave in southern Germany called Hohlenstein-Stadel, archaeologists recovered a figure carved from mammoth ivory, roughly 40,000 years old, about 30 centimeters tall. It has the head of a cave lion and the body of a human. It stands upright. It is called the Lion Man. Nobody has ever seen that animal, because it has never existed. Somebody sat with a piece of ivory and stone tools, for what was likely hundreds of hours, and made a thing that was only ever inside their head. And it is not a one-off. Composite beings, part human and part animal, keep turning up. In the cave of Trois Frères in France, there is a panel known as the Sorcerer, a figure read as antlered and part animal. Though it is worth knowing the famous published tracing of it may be more confident than the wall itself. In Lascaux, at the bottom of a shaft, there is a scene with a disemboweled bison, a bird-headed human figure lying stiff on the ground, and a bird perched on a stick. In Chauvet, in the deepest chamber, there is a composite of a bison and a woman's lower body, drawn across a hanging spur of rock. And on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, at a site called Ling Bulu Sipong 4, researchers reported a painted panel dated to at least 43,000 years old. It shows small figures with what appear to be animal features, holding lines that read as ropes or spears, facing wild pigs and dwarf buffalo. That is a hunting scene on one reading. On another, it is the oldest surviving picture of beings that are not quite people. Either way, 40,000 years ago, at opposite ends of Asia and Europe, humans were drawing creatures that combine species. And that matters, because you cannot draw an impossible being by accident. It requires holding a category that is not in front of you. Once a mind can do that, it can imagine a person who is not dead, or a presence with no body at all. Then there is where they put these things. Cave art is mostly not at the entrance where people slept. Much of it is deep inside, through crawls and squeezes, in chambers that are absolutely black. Somebody carried a burning lamp of animal fat into that dark, went past the point where the light of the world ends, and painted a wall almost nobody would ever see. There is a further argument, contested but interesting, that painted chambers cluster where the rock resonates. In the spots that hum and echo when you sing or clap. Add flickering firelight to a painted wall and the animals move. A bison drawn over a bulge in the stone breathes when the flame gutters. We cannot prove any of that was ritual, but if you were designing a place to feel watched, it would look very much like this. Handprints belong here too. Across Europe, Indonesia, Argentina, and Australia, people put a hand flat on stone and blue pigment around it. A hand stencil is the simplest possible statement. I was here. I touched this. It is also, unavoidably, a mark left for somebody else to find. If you have made it this far, it would genuinely help if you liked this video, subscribed, and sent it to one person who would find it strange. It is a small thing for you and a large thing for a channel this size. Now, back to the video. Because the third category is the one that stops people. Places built where nobody lived. In 1990, cavers in southwest France broke through into a sealed passage at a site called Bruniquel Cave. 336 meters from the entrance, in total darkness, they found structures. Stalagmites had been snapped off and arranged into two rings, one of them several meters across, with hundreds of pieces used and a total weight of more than 2 tons. There were traces of fire on them, burnt bone, deliberate heating. Then the structures were dated, about 176,000 years old. That is far too old for us. There were no modern humans in France then. This was Neanderthals, and there is no sign anyone lived in that chamber. No occupation debris, no scatter of tools from daily use. Just circles of broken stone, built by firelight, in a place you have to want to reach. Nobody knows what it was for. Anyone who tells you they know is guessing, but it is the oldest known construction of its kind, and it was made in the dark, far beyond any practical need. Then jump forward to roughly 11,500 years ago in southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe is a set of enclosures built around massive T-shaped limestone pillars, the largest around 5 meters tall and weighing many tons. They are carved with foxes, boars, snakes, scorpions, vultures, and spiders. Some of the pillars have arms running down their sides, and hands, and belts. They are not columns. They are figures. And the timing is the thing. This was built before farming was established in the region, by people still largely hunting and gathering. Heavy stone architecture is supposed to come after agriculture, not before it. The original excavator argued it was a sanctuary, a place people gathered for ritual rather than a settlement. That reading has since been challenged, because there is evidence of domestic activity and water management at the site, so people may well have lived there too. Either way, hunter-gatherers quarried and raised carved pillars weighing tons, arranged them in rings, did it repeatedly, and later filled some of the enclosures back in. And they were not alone. Nearby sites, including Karahan Tepe, show the same tradition. This was a regional practice, not one strange hill. From there, the record of the invisible gets loud. At Çatalhöyük in Turkey, people buried their dead under the floors of their own houses, sometimes directly under the sleeping platforms, and lived above them for generations. At Jericho and other sites in the Levant, around 9,000 years ago, skulls were coated in plaster, modeled into faces, and in some cases had shells set into the eye sockets. Think about what that object is. A face rebuilt on a dead relative's skull, with the eyes put back in, made to look at you. At Ain Ghazal in Jordan, large plaster statues from a similar period were found deliberately buried in pits, with wide painted eyes. And in the Ural Mountains, a carved wooden post called the Sungir idol survived in peat for about 12,500 years, covered in geometric marks and several faces. Wood almost never survives, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Most of what these people made was probably wood, hide, feather, and paint, and nearly all of it is gone. We are reading a library that lost most of its pages. So why would minds do any of this? There are hypotheses. They are hypotheses, not findings, and none of them can be tested on people who died 40,000 years ago. The most popular one is simple. Your brain is built to detect agents. Grass moves behind you. 2 options: wind or something alive. Assume wind and be wrong once, and you are dead. Assume something alive and be wrong 1,000 times, and you have wasted 1,000 startles. So the machinery is tuned to overdetect. You see faces in clouds, in sockets, in the fronts of cars, in the dark. You have felt a presence in an empty room and known there was nothing there. Extend that reflex far enough and you get a world where the wind has intention, the river has a temper, and the dead are still around somewhere, watching. A second idea, associated with the archaeologist David Lewis Williams, is that altered states of consciousness sit behind the imagery, and that the geometric patterns in cave art resemble what the visual system produces under trance. It is a genuinely influential argument, and heavily criticized, partly because it can explain almost anything and so risks explaining nothing. And here's the caution. This field has burned itself before. In the early 20th century, a Swiss cave called Drachenloch produced stacked cave bear skulls, and researchers announced a Neanderthal bear cult. It became famous. It is now largely rejected because ordinary cave processes can produce the same arrangement. That is why I keep hedging. Every generation finds its beautiful story, and some of those stories do not survive the next round of digging. But now come back to the eyes, because that thread does not fade. It intensifies. In Syria, at a site called Tell Brak, excavators found thousands of small carved figures around 5,500 years old, reduced almost entirely to a pair of enormous eyes. The building they came from is known as the Eye Temple. In Iraq, at Tell Asmar, a group of Sumerian statues were found buried beneath a temple floor. Standing figures, hands clasped, eyes wildly oversized, inlaid and staring. The usual interpretation is that these statues stood in for the worshipper. You could not stay in the temple forever, so you left a version of yourself there. Permanently in attendance. Eyes permanently open. In Egypt, the eye becomes protection and health. Painted on coffins, worn as an amulet, set on the prows of boats. And then, eventually, in Ezekiel, wheels of fire rimmed with eyes. Different peoples, different languages, thousands of years apart, keep landing on the same shape. Not a mouth, not a hand, an eye. Which makes a certain sense, because in this context an eye is not really an organ. An eye means attention, and attention means you can be judged. There is even modern work suggesting that images of eyes change behavior, including a study where an honesty box collected more money when a picture of eyes was pinned above it. Later attempts to replicate that effect have been mixed, so hold it lightly. But the intuition behind it is ancient. People behave differently when they think they are being watched. And that may be the practical answer to a hard problem. How do you get a few hundred strangers to keep promises to each other when nobody is looking? You do not need a police force if the sky is a witness. So, when did humans first believe something was watching them? The honest answer is that we do not know, and probably cannot know. What we can say is narrower and still remarkable. By around 40,000 years ago, humans were carving beings that do not exist, painting them in chambers you can only reach by crawling, and burying their children under thousands of hours of labor. By around 176,000 years ago, someone who was not quite us built rings of broken stone deep inside a French cave, and lit fires there. And by 9,000 years ago, people were rebuilding the faces of their dead in plaster and setting shells where the eyes had been. Every one of those acts costs time, calories, and risk, and returns nothing you can eat. That does not prove they believed in gods, or spirits, or an afterlife. We cannot prove that. The pigment does not tell us what it meant, and the pit does not tell us what they hoped. But it does tell us they were not behaving as though the world was empty, and you were still doing it. You check the doorway in the dark. You say a name out loud in a quiet room and feel it land somewhere. You catch a shape at the edge of your vision, and your chest tightens before your reasoning catches up. That is not a belief you chose. It is much older than you. Something in us has been watching the dark for the watchers for a very long time.